Hello everyone, my name is Fran Lee and I am part of the Psi Beta Introduction to Psychology Peer Teacher Project. This lesson presents some research on the most effective study methods, and we will also closely examine a study that compared the effectiveness of the two excellent study methods that we will be discussing today. So here are 10 different study techniques. The first is elaborative interrogation, which is when you generate an explanation for why an explicitly stated fact or concept is true. Second is self-explanation, which is when you explain how new information is related to information that is already known, or going and explaining steps taken during problem solving. Next is summarization, which is where you write summaries of text that need to be learned. Highlighting and underlining come next, where you mark potentially important portions of material that need to be learned while reading. Keyword mnemonic is keywords and mental imagery to associate verbal materials. For example, saying 1 is a bun, 2 is a show, 3 is a tree, 4 is a door, 5 is a hive, and 6 is sticks. The next is imagery for text, which is when you attempt to form mental images of text materials while reading or listening. Next is rereading, where you re-study text material again after an initial first reading. Practice testing is self-testing or taking practice tests. Distributed practice is using a schedule of practice that spreads out the study and the materials that you need to learn. And then interleaved practice is when you follow a schedule of practice that mixes different kinds of problems within the study that you need to be learning, or a schedule of study that mixes different kinds of material within a single study session. So the highlighted in yellow shaded techniques are highlighting and rereading, which are very popular. However, these are one of the least effective ways to study, which is surprising because many students tend to go this route when studying. And we know this because researchers combine the findings of many high-quality studies that use a true experimental design to come to these conclusions. Now we're going to be looking at one of these studies in detail so you get a sense of how these studies are done and what they find. So let's focus on just two study techniques, elaborative interrogation versus practice testing, in a 2013 study conducted by Dunslavsky where they compared the two to each other in terms of effectiveness. This graphic of encoding, storage, and retrieval illustrates the theory behind one of the study techniques, elaborative interrogation, which is studied in the 2013 study that we'll be looking at. Elaborative interrogation is based on the idea of elaborative encoding, and in general, the more you can elaborate on an idea or a concept, the better it should be remembered. Some types of elaboration includes thinking about how the material you're studying compares and differs from a different topic you have already studied, or ways in which the topic could be applied for practical purposes or outside of just the realm of the topic, or also drawing concept maps to connect to the different ideas. So this is a picture of a concept map, which is one of the examples of the elaborative interrogation study technique. So as you can see, there are a bunch of different topics, and then with arrows, it shows the relations that they have to each other. And elaborative interrogation is known to help encode the study material, put it into storage, and then easily retrieve the information during a test. This concept map works to make connections between different material that have already been studied prior and connecting them to one bigger piece as one whole. So another strategy is practice testing, which is also known as retrieval practice. It turns out that in addition to getting information into memory, we need to practice getting information out of memory. And this type of setting, practice testing, is also known to be an effective study technique. And there are many ways in which you can use retrieval practice. And some examples are reading a textbook and then closing it and writing down 3 main points, taking practice questions, and then studying with another person and quizzing one another. And lastly, brain dumping, which is when you take a piece of paper and write down everything you know about a topic, and the order in which you write down these ideas don't really matter. So here are some sample short answer questions that could be used for practice testing, which reflects the same study material as the concept map shown. Questions like what happens when hemoglobin combines with oxygen, and what would happen to blood flow from a wound if the body did not have fibrin. As mentioned earlier, the researchers Karpike and Blunt wanted to compare the elaborative technique to a retrieval practice technique. For the reasons we just talked about, we already know that both methods help memory, but the question now is one more effective than the other? The researchers who looked into this are cognitive psychologists who wanted to test elaboration and retrieval practice in conditions similar to real college classrooms. And there are two levels of independent variable. For the elaborative condition, Karpike and Blunt asked students to create a concept map. A concept map is one kind of elaborative study technique, and it requires you to actively think about the information and organize them in a new way. The students were given a passage to read and then instructed to create a concept map about the information in the passage. For the retrieval practice condition, Karpike and Blunt used a free recall task. It was not a recognition task because there were no cues to help students recall the information, and the students just opened a blank word processing document and typed as much as they could recall from the passage they had just read. Now looking at your worksheet and this slide, what predictions would you make about the effectiveness of the two study techniques? Fill in the blanks for the two following hypotheses statements with either elaborative studying or retrieval practice. For the two dependent variables, Karpike and Blunt tested students using two types of tests. One was a short answer test, and the other required students to create a concept map for memory. The other kind of test was a closed book concept map, where students had to create a concept map without any cues. Following the two questions from the previous slide, please identify the independent and dependent variables in this study. Keep in mind that the independent variables are manipulated by the experimenter. So looking first at answer choice G for number 3, students' major wasn't measured here and definitely was not manipulated by the experimenter, so we can rule out G. We can also rule out the concept map test score and short answer test scores because the scores are based on student performance and not assigned by the experimenter. For the independent variables, the experimenter told the participants how to study. So the independent variable is the study condition, but is the right answer A, B, or C? So the independent variable is A, the study condition, and that variable has two levels, which we discussed earlier to be the elaborative studying and retrieval practice. Students often choose B or C. However, an independent variable is a variable, so it has to be something that can vary. If the independent variable were elaborative studying, everyone would be in the same group and nothing would vary and there would be no comparison group. So B and C are incorrect. However, they can be seen to be part of the independent variable as two different levels. Now for the dependent variable, it depends on the independent variable. In this study, students' major, again, wasn't measured here and definitely did not depend on how students were told to study, so we can rule out G. We just figured out that the experimenter manipulated the study condition, and the dependent variable is not manipulated by the experimenter, so we can rule out A. And we decided elaborative studying and retrieval practice were not actually variables, but instead levels of the independent variable. So we can also cross out B and C. And we hypothesized that the concept map test score depends on how students study. So we keep D. And we also hypothesized that the short answer test scores depend on how students study. So again, we keep the answer choice F as well. Now on your worksheet, again, please try drawing the bar chart you would expect to see if both of your hypotheses are correct. And also on the same worksheet, try drawing the bar chart that would result if the study strategy matched the type of test used to measure the student's knowledge. In the original study, students predicted elaborative studying would be more effective than retrieval practice. This graph is the metacognitive predictions, which is what happens when students thought would happen. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you what Karpike and Blunt really found. And the results might surprise you, and they have real implications for how you might study in this class and other classes in the future. So here it is. And first, let's look at the metacognitive predictions again. Again, this is how students thought they would do. And on the concept map test, they thought they'd do better if they studied with the concept map. That would make sense if they thought they should study based on their study strategy to the type of test. But when we look at the short answer test, we see that they thought they'd do better on that test when they studied the concept map as well. So it's not that they thought matching of the tests were important, but they thought concept mapping was a more effective way to study no matter the kind of test that they had to take. And you can see that for both tests, the blue bars are higher than the green bars. Now, how did the students really perform? So the metacognitive predictions are on the right here. And we just saw those and noticed that the blue bars are higher than the green bars for both the final short answer and final concept map test. But then on the left is the actual performance scores. And what do we see? Well, we see the opposite pattern, where the green bars are higher than the blue bars for both tests. The students were right in that it was not helpful to match study technique to the test, but they were wrong about retrieval practice. Retrieval practice, which is just writing down as much as you can recall about a topic, may not seem like an effective study technique, but that strategy did produce higher scores in the experiment. So this ends lesson 6. However, please plan to keep the summary of the effective learning strategies, which is the handout that we prepared for this lesson. Using these strategies can have a huge impact on your study time, academic success, and being a more effective learner throughout your life. Have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you.